Hello everyone, it's January the 5th, 2026, and I want to talk about a little bit about what's going on in Venezuela and basically what's going on around the world that affects Venezuela, it affects the United States, and it affects basically everyone in the world, really. But it's not something that you're going to hear from the news media on either side. Whether either side is fake news or not, they're not talking about that. Right now, across every network, you're watching the same story on repeat. Special forces descending from the sky, a Latin American president in handcuffs. The commentators are praising tactical precision and strategic brilliance. They want you to focus on the spectacle, on the daring raid, on the military success. But if you're watching the helicopters, you're not watching the balance sheet. This was never about regime change for democracy. This wasn't about human rights violations or drug cartels. This was about a debt collection operation with gunships. There's an old rule in There's an old rule in geopolitics that everyone pretends it doesn't exist. You cannot sanction the countries that control your vital resources. Not forever, anyway. Not without consequences. For the last 23 years, the United States tried to defy that simple rule. They sanctioned Venezuela, they froze assets, which in turn doesn't hurt the government, it hurts the people. They recognized parallel governments, they funded opposition movements, like the opposition of Nicolas Maduro with Machado. They did everything except for the one thing that they have just done. Until this week, when all of that collapsed in the most revealing way possible. On December 28th, Nicolas Maduro was signing an agreement with China worth $18 billion. 2 days later, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, quietly requested a meeting with Venezuelan officials in Panama not to threaten them, not to impose conditions to negotiate access to the oil that Washington has spent 2 decades trying to destroy. What you're witnessing it's not diplomacy. It's capitalization that got interrupted by helicopters. And it reveals something critical. When an empire loses control over resources that it once considered a guaranteed resource, the collapse doesn't arrive gradually. It arrives in cascade. I can talk to you a little bit about the numbers and explain why this is happening now, why this week, why this operation couldn't wait. We've got to do it now. But that's not anything that you're going to hear on the news media or from the president. Venezuela controls the largest certified oil reserves on the planet. 303.8 billion barrels. Iran, which is Venezuela's strategic ally, controls another 28.6 billion. So together they represent 32% of the global proven reserves. And both of them have formally exited the financial system controlled by Washington, by the United States. It's not a theory. If you look, this week marks the breaking point where the architecture that sustained American it sustained Americans for 80 years, it began an irreversible disintegration. But to understand why American helicopters just landed in Caracas, you need to understand a bigger problem that almost no one's going to talk about: the refinery mismatch. The media has been selling you a story for years. They told you that the shale revolution made American energy independent. They told you the United States is now the world's largest producer, and it doesn't need to care about the Middle East or Latin America anymore to survive. This is a half-truth. And in geopolitics, a half-truth is a full lie. The United States does produce massive amounts of oil, but it produces a light, sweet crude. It's like champagne. Bubbly, light, expensive to extract, and not what American refineries were built to process. The problem is the massive refineries in Texas and Louisiana that have been the industrial backbone of America's energy for more than 50 years were built 50 years ago. They were designed to process heavy, sour crudes. The thick, sludgy oil that comes from Venezuela and the Middle East, America produces champagne, but its engines and its economy runs on diesel. For decades, the United States has solved this problem by importing the heavy crudes from Saudi Arabia, and we've gotten a little bit from Venezuela. But that relationship is now basically effectively dead. Saudi Arabia is no longer the gas station for the West. They're cutting their production to keep the prices up. They're joining the BRICS. They're ignoring calls from Washington. The Saudi prince has made it very clear he is no longer interested in being a vassal state. So the United States faces a mathematical problem. They were running out of the specific type of oil needed to keep their refineries running at capacity. And worse, they had already played their emergency card over the last 2 years. The Biden administration drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The SPR is meant for war. It's meant for national emergencies. It's not meant to buy votes or artificially lowering gas prices for the elections, before the election. Yet, he opened the taps. They flooded the markets with millions of barrels to keep prices down. Now, the bills come due. It's time to pay the piper. The SPR is at its lowest level since 1983. 351 million barrels. That's it. Under the Biden administration, 180 million barrels were released in 2022 alone to control prices after the Ukraine conflict started. Those barrels have not been replaced. The International Energy Agency projects a deficit of 1.22 million barrels daily for 2025 if the tensions with Iran escalate and Russian sanctions remain in place. That's what they had predicted. So here we are in 2026. Washington looks at the map. They looked for heavy crude suppliers. Canada is already pumping at maximum capacity. Russia is sanctioned and hostile. Saudi Arabia is uncooperative and pivoting towards Beijing. That leaves one option: the massive heavy crude fields of the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela. Venezuela currently produces 780,000 barrels daily under Chinese technical management, and Russia Russian financial support. That production could reach 1.4 million barrels daily within 18 months. But here's the problem with this entire operation. That oil's already committed. China signed an oil contract, prepayment contract, with Venezuela worth $62 billion between 2007 and 2024. Russia provided another $17 billion in credit lines backed by crude oil shipments. To help Venezuela, they're giving them credit lines against the oil. India is completely indifferent to American sanctions, and they now export 340,000 barrels daily of Venezuelan oil. And they refine it and they re-export it to Europe as an Indian product. The United States has tried four strategies to break down this encirclement. Every single one of them has failed. The first strategy was to maximize pressure through sanctions. It failed because Venezuela developed export networks completely outside the SWIFT banking system. Ships with flags of convenience. Payments in yuan, refineries in Malaysia. So Washington discovered that sanctioning paper does not stop oil molecules from moving. The second strategy was regime change through proxies. The United States spent millions of dollars trying to instill and put into place Juan Guaido, recognizing him as the legitimate president, even though he's never controlled a single military or done anything to fit the bill. And by 2023, even the Venezuelan opposition had abandoned him. And the American recognition became an international joke, really. I mean, it was just a joke. Oh, he's the president. Well, he's not. He's not even in the country. The third strategy was diplomatic isolation. And it failed because 134 countries never recognized Juan Guaido. Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, they restored full diplomatic relationships with Caracas between 2022 and 2024, completely ignoring Washington's objectives. The fourth strategy was conditional licensing, allowing companies like Chevron limited permissions to operate in Venezuela, but with strings attached. This is failing right now because Maduro learned the fundamental lesson: never trust American concessions designed as control levers. And then came the final trigger, the currency war. Intelligence reports that mainstream media is conveniently ignoring that Caracas was preparing what financial analysts were calling a nuclear option. Venezuela was on the verge of officially integrating its energy sector into China's cross-member interbank payment systems, the CIP. Excuse me. Their price was I can't talk today. They were preparing to price their entire reserve, the largest on earth, not in US dollars, but in another basket of currencies led by the UN and backed by gold. If this was to happen, or if it had happened before we went and attacked Venezuela, it would have been a signal to the entire global South, and it would have proven that you can possess massive resources and wealth outside the American banking system and survive. The United States saw this as an existential threat. I'll explain to you why this matters so much. The American dollar is not backed by gold, and it has not been since 1971. It's not backed by industrial productivity. The manufacturing base has been hollowed out for decades. It's backed by one thing, an agreement made 50 years ago with Saudi Arabian oil. Oil must be sold in dollars. This is the magic trick, because every nation on earth needs oil, no matter who you are. Every nation needs dollars, US currency, to buy them. This creates a permanent artificial demand for US dollars. It allows the United States to print trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, export our inflation to the whole rest of the world, and never face any consequences. The system is called the exorbitant privilege. It's the source of American prosperity and has been for a half of a century. But recently, the magic started to fade. In June of 2024, the Saudi American petrodollar agreement formally expired. Saudi Arabia did not want to renew it. They now accept Chinese yuan for oil sales to China, their largest customer. In November of 2024, the United Arab Emirates, that's hard to say that 3 times fast, processed 128 billion bilateral trade with China completely in yuan. Russia sells oil to India in rupees and rubles. Iran sells to China in yuan. The dollar's share of global currency exchange reserves fell from 71% in 1999 to 58% in 2024. Each percentage point of decline represents approximately $350 billion in reduced demand for U.S. Treasury. And this is where Venezuela became the red line. If Venezuelan oil disconnects from the dollar, the demand for U.S. Treasury bonds collapse even further. Interest rates spike. The entire debt-based economy of the West, which depends on cheap borrowing, it will implode. So they had a choice: accept the new multipolar reality and negotiate as an equal partner, or use the one asset that they still have in complete abundance, and that's military force. They chose the gun. They chose war, basically. The operation itself was, from a purely tactical standpoint, extraordinary. And we need to acknowledge that because it tells us something about what comes next. Dan Caney, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, gave a presentation and a little speech after the press conference the other day, and he said they've been preparing for this for months. They rehearsed it. They had someone very close to Maduro. They knew where he ate, what he ate, who he was eating with. They probably knew what his pets' names were. And they were waiting for the right weather, the right conditions. For several days, the operation was ready, but the weather kept delaying it. The minute conditions aligned, they moved. Helicopters came in. Electricity was reportedly cut in the key areas. Air defenses were neutralized, and here came the Delta Force operatives. And Trump made a point to say it was them, and there was a mention of a 49-year-old operator extracted, and a 49-year-old operator extracted Maduro from his residence. There was no American casualties. Maduro is now in New York going to court to face a sealed indictment that has been waiting since 2020. And Trump at the press conference couldn't contain himself. He said, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, "You're probably never going to get to see what I saw last night. It was amazing. These guys were moving so fast." He said he was watching it in real time at Mar-a-Lago, and it was like a TV reality show. Which in his mind, I'm sure he thought it was. But here's where the big spectacular thing ends. And all of the consequences begin. Trump and Rubio were asked repeatedly at the press conference, who's going to run Venezuela now? How long will American forces be there? What's the plan for governance? And they had no answer. Rubio went up and gave some rambling speech about how, when Trump says something, he means you got to take him at his word. But they never really presented any sort of a plan. Just a vague references to the guys behind me and things, like, oh, they're going to run it. And he was gesturing to Hank Seth and Stephen Miller, which would be the last person you would want running that down there. Stephen Miller, the racist guy, he would want to whitewash Venezuela. So that wouldn't work out very good. Then there'd be genocide probably. But those aren't the people who are going to sit in Caracas organizing public infrastructure. Trump did say that the American oil companies are going in and help Venezuela rebuild it. They're going to rebuild its energy section. And he was very explicit about that. He said it's pathetic how much they've been producing, giving how much they have, their reserves. And American companies are going to fix that. But here's the problem with anyone who's studied post-conflict reconstruction understands immediately that Venezuela is not Panama. This is not 1989 when George H.W. Bush sent forces in to remove General Noriega. Panama had 3 million people. Venezuela has 30 million people. Panama had a massive American military base strategically located near the vital Panama Canal. Venezuela has neither. And not only that, more importantly, Maduro was not a personalist dictator. This is not like removing Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, where the entire state structure revolved around one individual. Maduro rose with a system, the Chavista system, and a network of generals, intelligence chiefs, judiciary officials, paramilitary groups called collectivos, and they control everything from the ports to the food distribution. The defense minister is still in place. The interior minister, Diosdado Cabello, one of the most powerful figures in the regime, is still there. The vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is still there. All of these people control all the pieces of the economy and control the government and control the people. Venezuela has, and this is a critical detail, multiples more generals compared to the average soldier than anywhere. They have tons of generals. Everybody's a freaking general. Anywhere on earth. about 20 times as many as you would expect in a normal military structure. Every general has a monopoly somewhere. They control mining concessions, they control ports, they control oil distribution. The military doesn't just defend Venezuela, the military is the economy of Venezuela. Like, there's a general appointed over everything that goes on in Venezuela, from the electrical grid to the power plants to the refineries and they have followers and they have people. And these Chavistas are loyal to Chavez, and they were loyal to Maduro. And they're not just going to roll over and go, hey, here, come get our resources, do this, do that, let you run our country. And they've spoken out, and I've watched it, they've spoken out. So what happens now? Does the Nobel Prize winning Maria Corina Machado take over? Does she come in and say, I'm bringing transitional justice? I'm prosecuting the top figures in the whole Maduro regime? If she does, every one of these generals is going to think, hold on, I own a mining concession, I own the electric grid, I own, the grocery sector, and I don't trust Donald Trump, and I don't trust this amnesty. Why would I give up power and wealth and risk prosecution? Either they're going to cling to power and try to cut some deal with Richard Grenell, Trump's envoy, to secure their assets, or they resist. That's what's going to happen. And if they resist, Trump has already signaled what comes next. At a press conference, he said very clearly, we had a second wave of attacks ready to go. He repeated that multiple times. So the message is obvious. Fall in line or we'll hit you again. But this is where the operation, tactically brilliant as it was, becomes strategically catastrophic. Because the rest of the world is watching. Every country in the global south, from Nigeria to Brazil, Indonesia, is watching what's going on in Venezuela and thinking the same thing. If we refuse to sell our resources in dollars, will they come for us next? This fear doesn't create loyalty, it creates exodus. Let's see what's really happening in the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia in October 2024. Vladimir Putin announced the developments of the BRICS Pay, a blockchain cross-border payment system that completely bypasses the US dollar. Brazil is already piloting it for agricultural trade. South Africa processed its first diamond transaction in November. Iran and Russia are settling arms sales through it. Venezuela has just applied for formal BRICS membership. If accepted, and it will be, its 303.8 billion barrels of oil reserves will be integrated into an economic, architecturally completely isolated from Washington. The transition's already happened. The world simply hasn't realized it. China's official gold reserves increased by 225 tons in 2023 alone. Actual purchases are probably double that. Though Hong Kong imports that aren't fully reported, they haven't totally reported everything. Russia was completely excluded from SWIFT in 2022. Their response: build the financial message transfer system. now processing 30% of Russian domestic payments and expanding to 159 financial institutions in 20 countries. China launched CES in 2015. As of early 2025, it connects 1,423 financial institutions in 109 countries. It processes 436 billion in daily transactions, completely outside dollar-based clearing systems. The BRICS expansion in 2023 added Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Ethiopia. That's 45% of the world's population, 36% of global GDP and purchasing power, and controls 72% of the planet's proven oil reserves. By attacking Venezuela to secure its oil fields, the United States has proved exactly why the world needs an alternative system. They validated every speech Putin, Xi Jinping have ever made about American unilateralism and aggression before this operation. Countries used the dollar because it was convenient, stable, and the infrastructure was already there. After this operation, countries will dump the US dollar because holding US assets now means you're vulnerable. It means your sovereignty is conditional. The petrodollar is no longer a trade agreement. It's a hostage situation. Now we can talk about the legal dimension because this matters for what happens next. The operation was launched with no congressional authorization. Congress was not consulted. In fact, congressional committees had called the administration officials weeks earlier and asked directly, "Are y'all planning regime change for Venezuela?" They were told no. Senators are now coming out saying they were lied to. Trump's defense delivered by Marco Rubio at the press conference was that Congress leak said we couldn't be trusted with any operational security. There was no consultation with the United States, no Security Council resolution, no attempts to build international legitimacy. The justification being used is that Venezuela represents a narco-terrorist threat to the United States. The Maduro regime was flooding America with drugs, and therefore this all falls under national security emergency powers. Most international law experts are saying this is nonsense. Under the UN Charter, you need either a Security Council resolution or an imminent threat to justify military intervention in another sovereign state. Venezuela, a country of 30 million people located 3,500 kilometers from Florida, does not represent an imminent threat. There's a legal argument to that, but Trump doesn't care, basically. He doesn't care about anything like that. He doesn't care about the legal argument, and he doesn't even hide it. He just does what he wants. At a press conference, he mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, specifically the idea that Western Hemisphere is America's sphere and is of influence. He was even joking, saying, "Oh, people are calling it the Monroe Doctrine," trying to put his name into it like he does on everything. It's a 19th century way of thinking, gunboat diplomacy. We're going to use that for influence. And because of that, it makes it right. And the message to the rest of Latin America was pretty explicit. Trump was even saying things about Colombia. He said, Colombian president, and I'm quoting here, needs to watch his ass because Colombia is flooding the United States with drugs. He talked about Mexico, saying Claudia Sheinbaum claims she runs Mexico, but actually the cartels run Mexico. The implications are clear. Comply or you're next. He's not even pretending anymore. His mask is off. The mask of the liberal international order, the rhetoric about democracy and human rights and rule of law, it's gone. This is all about raw power politics, and the world is reacting accordingly. China issued a statement calling this a breach of international law, reckless and dangerous. Russia's foreign minister, Lovu, said the same thing. But what's interesting is the statements feel muted. It's almost like a pro forma. It's as if they're going through the motions of condemnation without actually committing to any real pushback. And that tells you something. Russia and China are not willing to stand up for their proxies when the United States uses military. When they didn't stand up for Venezuela, basically, when we used force. And Venezuela was receiving support from both. China's made massive loans. Russia's provided military cooperation and financial support. And yet when the American helicopters flew in, there was no real response. This raises the critical question for the multipolar world order. If the United States can still execute operations like this with impunity, how multipolar is the world really? But I think that's the wrong lesson to draw. Because while China and Russia didn't intervene militarily, they don't need to. The response isn't military, it's financial. Every country watching this is accelerating their exit from the dollar independence. They're buying gold, they're joining CFS. They're negotiating bilateral trade in their local currencies. The response is structural, not tactical. And that brings up the biggest problem facing the United States right now, the day after. There's the big think tanks going back about a decade about regime change scenarios in Venezuela. Brookings, the American Enterprise Institute, dozens of war games and policy simulations. They all identify the same challenges. First, what do you do with the former regime elements in Iraq? They disbanded both parties and sacked everyone. They created a massive insurgency. If you prosecute too many Venezuelan generals and officials, you create a resistance movement. But if you forgive them and you let them keep all their little mining concessions, and then 80% of the Venezuelans will say, what the hell's the point? You know? What do you do with the colectivos? These are paramilitary groups, maybe 2 to maybe 300,000 people who control food distribution, neighborhood security, and they've been armed for years. They're not in the jungle. They're in the urban centers. The playbook says that you'd need to demobilize and disarm them. In Colombia, they did this with 14,000 FARC fighters over the years. In Venezuela, you're talking about 300,000 people. The scale is completely different. The third is infrastructure. Venezuela's oil industry has been destroyed by decades of underinvestment and sanctions. Electricity is unreliable, water systems are failing. Getting oil production back to meaningful levels can take 5 to 10 years, even with the American companies involved. And then the fourth is governance. Who actually runs the country? Trump was asked this several times at the press conference, especially. He has no clear answer. He gestured to the people behind him, and he said, these guys will handle it. Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Stephen Miller. But they're not going to be administering Venezuelan public services. The assumption seems to be that Maria Corina Machado and the opposition will take over, but she hasn't been mentioned prominently. And he was actually kind of pouring water on the idea the other day. So, and there's another detail that should probably terrify everyone. Trump mentioned that Marco Rubio had been in contact with Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, the vice president of Venezuela that stepped into power when they took Maduro. And she's part of the regime, That suggests that the United States may actually try to cut a deal with the existing people and the structure minus Maduro, install a new face, but keep the same system in place as long as they agree to sell us oil in U.S. dollars and allow all the American companies to come back in there and pillage the resources of Venezuela, which is a whole nother storyline that we can talk about how we stole the oil, whatever. This really wasn't about liberating Venezuela. It was all about changing management. And that's most likely going to backfire spectacularly. If the generals and the judiciary and the collectivos stay in power, just under a new name, under a new badging, all of the people in Venezuela who were celebrating the removal of Maduro are going to feel betrayed. And rightfully so, And you'll have a massive protest. You'll have resistance. You'll have instability that could last for years and years. And the United States has zero appetite for boots on the ground long term. Trump has made that clear. That's what he's going to end up with. But he's always said, no long wars, and we want to be the peace people. But then it happens opposite of what he says. So he doesn't want to occupy the other countries. So you basically get the worst possible outcome. You get a power vacuum. You get competing factions, no legitimate governance, and oil production that stays disrupted. Meanwhile, Trump will declare victory. He'll hold a press conference showing footage of the raid and move up to the next headline, but the consequences will still compound. Think about the signal that this sends to every other country with natural resources. If you're sitting in Saudi Arabia right now watching this, what do you conclude? You conclude that having oil reserves makes you a target. That's what you conclude. If you don't comply with Washington's demands, so what do? You diversify. You move your wealth into assets the U.S. military can't take. Gold to, minerals, real estate, neutral, and you move them into neutral jurisdictions. You accelerate your entry into the BRICS. You build alternative payment systems. You reduce your exposure to American financial system as quickly as possible. Get out, bail out, run. The same thing's happening in the UAE, in Kazakhstan, in Nigeria and Indonesia. Every oil-producing nation is watching and adjusting. Trump thinks he's securing America's energy independence. So we're going to have all the oil. But what he's actually doing is fragmenting the global market, energy market, and tearing it into and tearing it into just little blocks that trade outside of the dollar system. And once all that fragmentation is complete, the United States loses its ability to print money. Without consequences anyway. I mean, we're just going to print money, but there's going to be big consequences over just printing it. So in practical terms for Americans right now, you're paying, let's say, $4.80 a gallon for gasoline in California. That price is not determined by supply and demand like they say. It's determined by the geopolitical risk for premiums, future markets, the future markets are pricing in the growing probability that the United States cannot secure reliable access to low-cost energy in the next 24 months, in other words. So your heating bills this winter reflect the same calculations. American natural gas trades at a 40% premium over European prices. Even though the U.S. produces more because Europe built LNG infrastructure, that diversifies suppliers. The U.S. is trapped with domestic pipeline dependency while simultaneously sanctioning foreign producers who can stabilize the markets. Your purchasing power at the grocery store each dollar, buying 23% less than in 2020. It's partially monetary inflation, yes, but it's also a structural fracture of the dollar-based supply chains. When Brazil trades soybeans with China and yuan, when Russia sells fertilizer to India and rupees, when Saudi Arabia sells oil to Japan without touching the dollar, the U.S. dollar, dominated the accounts that are dominated by the dollar. Each of those transactions reduce demand for your currency. Demand reduction means devaluation. That's what it means. Devaluation means your salary buys less. Your retirement savings, if they're in traditional treasury heavy index funds, are structurally exposed to the risk that foreign governments diversify away from those bonds, from some of those bonds, those same bonds that you're, carrying. When China reduced Treasury holdings by 30 billion in a single quarter last year, bond yields increased to attract replacement buyers. Higher bond yields mean lower bond valuations. Your retirement funds hold those bonds. This is one of the hidden costs of what just happened in Venezuela. The immediate spectacle is dramatic, but the long-term financial consequences will be devastating. Now, there's an argument some people will make. They'll say, look, Maduro was a terrible person. He rigged the elections. He tortured opponents. He destroyed the Venezuelan economy. The country went from the wealthiest in Latin America to one of the poorest. 8 million refugees fled. Getting rid of him is a great thing. And on a human level, yeah, Maduro was a disaster. No question about it. But the problem with that argument is that it confuses morality with strategy. Removing a bad leader through military force without a plan for what comes next, without regional support, without legitimacy, creates worse problems than it solves. We've seen this problem before. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. Every time the narrative was the same, the leader is terrible, the people will welcome us. We install democracy. We install democracy. Everything will be fine. And every time it's turned into a disaster, because toppling a government is the easy part. We got a great military. We can just go right in there and get it done. Building a functional state is the hard part. And there's zero indication that the Trump administration has thought beyond the raid itself and past his own nose. At the press conference, a reporter asked, "How long will American forces be in Venezuela?" Trump answered, "We're not worried about boots on the ground." That's not the answer. That's an invasion. Either you commit to a long-term stabilization, which Trump has no interest in, or you leave quickly and hope someone else figures it out, right? If you leave quickly, you get chaos. If you stay long-term, you get an occupation that drains resources and becomes politically toxic domestically. There's no good option once you've launched the operation without a plan. And that's the fundamental problem here. This wasn't a strategic decision. It was a reactive one, driven by panic over oil supplies. And being scared about what's going to happen to the U.S. dollar. What happens next is, it's not a speculation. This is pattern recognition. Based on how these situations have always unfolded historically. In the short term, oil markets will rally. Investors will bet that Venezuelan production comes back online quickly under American management. Oh my gosh, gas prices might even drop a little. Wall Street's going to celebrate. Trump's going to declare a victory. He'll hold rallies. He'll talk about American strength and how he did what no other president could do. But within about 6 months, the cracks will start showing. Venezuelan oil production won't recover as quickly as promised. The infrastructure is in terrible shape. It's actually worse than probably what they ever could have imagined, because of the generals who control the oil in that sector are either they've pillaged the money, they've done this, and they haven't reinvested into it, but they're going to figure out that producing oil as quick and as online as what they thought's not going to happen. They're going to find out that the generals that are in control of that oil sector are either hiding actively or they're sabotaging any operations that we're trying to do to better the situation. Because the workers don't trust the new government. They don't trust what's going on with Trump, or something's going on there. The collectivos will start low-level resistance. Probably not a full insurgency at first. Just enough disruption to make governance impossible, basically. Targeted strikes, protests, sabotaging the American oil companies. And then the oil companies will start complaining that the security situation makes it impossible to operate. They'll demand more protection. This means more American personnel on the ground, even if they called contractors instead of soldiers. Within a year, you'll have congressional hearings asking why billions in reconstruction aid are disappearing, with nothing to show for it. Why oil production is still below, their expectations. Why Venezuela is still unstable. And Trump will do what he's always done. He'll blame someone else. He'll blame the previous administration. Blame the Venezuelan opposition for not being competent. Blame Europe for not contributing enough. But it's too late. The damage will be done, not just in Venezuela, but globally, all over the world. Because every country that was on the fence about joining BRICS will now have made that decision. Every country that was considering pricing commodities in yuan will now move forward with that. Every country that was debating whether to keep reserves and dollars will have diversified. The Venezuelan operation will be studied in the future, not as a triumph, but as a moment American unilateralism finally broke the international order and claimed to be upholding. And here's the deepest irony. Trump thinks he's demonstrating strength. He thinks he's showing the world that America is back and that it can project power anywhere and that it doesn't need to ask permission. But what he is actually demonstrating is a desperation of a truly powerful country that doesn't need to invade to secure resources. It offers the best trade deals, the best technology, the most stable currency. If what you do is on the up and up and it's decent and people are treated fairly, like, for instance, if I'm running a business, there can be 50 other people running the same exact kind of business, but if I'm doing my business with integrity, I'm reasonable in my business costs that I apply to other people, and those things, people will want to do business with me. People don't want to do business with criminals, basically. You just really don't want to. People want to trade with you because it benefits them. When you have to use military force to secure access to oil, when you have to threaten your neighbors, when you have to tear up the rule book and operate through pure coercion, that's not strength. That's not integrity. That's the behavior of a declining power that can no longer compete on merit. And the whole world is seeing that. China sees it, Russia sees it, India sees it, Brazil sees it. Even allies like France and Germany are seeing it. Even if they won't say it publicly yet, they see it. The Venezuelan operation has been accomplished. It has been accomplished, but it has accomplished the opposite of its intended goal. It was supposed to secure American access to oil and reinforce dollar dominance. Instead, it accelerated the global move away from dollar dependence and proven that American power, while still formidably militarily, is strategically brittle. It's basically proved that while still formidable militarily, it's strategically brittle. You can win every tactical battle and still lose the war. So where does this leave us? The helicopters have left Caracas. Maduro's in jail in New York. The news cycle will move to the next crisis within days. Maybe it'll be Greenland. Hey, wonder if it'll be Canada or Colombia or Mexico or something else that Trump will tweet out at 3 a.m. in the morning. But the structural damage is permanent. The trust that held the whole international system together for 80 years. The idea that there were rules, that sovereignty mattered, that the military force was like a last resort. Anyway, like our military force will be a last resort. Not the first option. That's all gone. It's gone. Bye-bye. And you can't rebuild trust with press releases. Countries are always going to remember what happened. They'll remember that when an oil-rich nation tried to trade outside the dollar system, American Special Forces came in the middle of the night, and they'll act accordingly. The petrodollar era is ending. Not because of inflation or cryptocurrency or any of those things your financial commentators will talk about. It's ending because the United States just demonstrated that the system is no longer based on mutual benefit. It's based on coercion. And in the long run, coercion is more expensive than cooperation. You can force compliance with the military for a while, but eventually people find ways around you. They'll build alternate systems. They form alliances. They root around the obstacle. That process has already started. Venezuela was not just the catalyst that made it undeniable. The empire is not collapsing in a dramatic explosion. It's eroding one decision at a time, one ally at a time, 1 percentage point of reserve currency at a time. And the people making the decisions, the ones standing at the podium celebrating tactical victories, they either don't understand what they're doing or they just don't care, because the consequences won't hit until they're out of office. But the consequences will hit. They always do. And when they do, when oil is priced in multiple currencies, when treasury auctions start failing, when the dollar loses another 10 or 15% points of reserve status, when inflation comes back with a vengeance because there's no longer artificial demand for American currency, the people who will pay the price won't be the generals, the politicians. It'll be the people watching this video. It'll be you. It'll be me. It'll be us. The people trying to pay rent, buy groceries, save for their retirement, and plan for their futures. That's becoming more uncertain day by day. That's the real story behind the helicopters. That's what they don't want you focused on while you're watching the spectacle. The operations in Venezuela wasn't about democracy. It wasn't about human rights. It wasn't even really about Maduro. It was about a financial system that's dying and an empire that's willing to use violence to keep it on life support. For a few more years, they can probably keep it on life support. But you can't stop structural change with helicopters. You can delay it. You can make it messier. You can ensure that when it finally happens, it's more chaotic and more painful than it needed to be, but you can't stop it. The world is reorganizing. New systems are being built. New alliances are being formed. New currencies are emerging. And the country that could have led that transition, that could have shaped it in a way that preserved its influence and prosperity, has instead chosen to fight with it and fight it with everything it has. And that's the tragedy here. Not that change is coming. Change was already coming. The tragedy is that it's going to be so much harder than it needed to be for everyone. Pay attention to what's happening next in Venezuela. Not all the headlines, the details. Watch whether oil production actually recovers. Watch whether American companies can operate safely, without problems, without protections, without security details to go work in the country. Watch whether the new government, whatever it looks like, has any legitimacy with the Venezuelan people. Watch whether other Latin American countries, watch whether other Latin American countries fall into line or start hedging their bets. Watch whether Saudi Arabia accelerates its BRICS integration. Watch whether China announces new commodity trading agreements in yuan. Those are the signals that matter, because the helicopters were just the opening scene. The real story is what comes after. And based on every historical precedent we have, what comes after is going to be considerably more complicated than the people in charge are prepared to handle. It's a sad situation that we're in. And like I say, people are going to say, oh, well, Nicolas Maduro needed to be out of there. I mean, I agree. There's a lot of people that wanted him out of there. He was not a nice person. But that wasn't what it was about. You can't tell me a president that goes, oh, these people are garbage. They're SAers and they're killers and they're insane asylum patients. They're just trash, that he cares about those people that he calls trash. You know? Can't tell me Stephen Miller, just wants to liberate Venezuela and give all those brown people the better life because he hates them. He don't like them. He's made no bones about it. You know? And then Marco Rubio, yeah, he wants to fix Venezuela and fix Cuba and carry on this legacy, this heritage of, all these things going on. Yeah, okay, whatever. But they didn't consider what we do now after the helicopters fly away, and here we are. We got this big mess to clean up. And with the fact that our dollar's declining, people are reorganizing and going with other options other than the United States, and it's not going to help our dollar, it's going to hurt it. How many of those hurt dollars are we going to spend now in another country? I would love to help all the people of Venezuela and give them stability and give them, economic freedom. Everyone have a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage, and I'd love that. I love people. I want people to do good. But we've just made things worse for them, and we've made things worse for ourselves in a lot of ways, but especially on the global stage. And now Congress can go in there and appropriate however many hundreds and hundreds of millions, maybe trillions of dollars to go in and rebuild Venezuela, I guess. I don't know. That's just what we're going to have to do, because, you can't operate with the systems they have in place now. And when you have hundreds of thousands of people standing against you, sabotaging what you're doing, threatening people, you need security forces to guard the people that are rebuilding the infrastructure, guard the people that are extracting oil, guard the people that are moving oil. It's boots on the ground, no matter what they say, unless we just walk away and let it all collapse. And then for what? Why did we do that? If we don't go in and fix everything and make it look perfect and spend trillions of dollars and get it to where everybody's going, oh, what they did there was great, we look more foolish, we look more stupid, it hurts us more, it hurts our pride. And we just locked ourselves into years and years and years and years of building infrastructure, building an economy and everything in another country. What happened to America first? Y'all have a good day. If you like what I got to say, some of the things that I try to prepare and put together for you or whatever, like and subscribe. It's not about money for me, but I just like to get a good message out. I like to share a little reality with people and give people other things to think about. Comment. I'll read your comments. I'm always open to new ideas and what people think. I work every day. I'm making my money anyway. I don't care if my channel goes viral and I get millions of people. But if it does, that's millions of people that's going to hear something besides what the mainstream media says. They're going to get a little bit of reality and truth. So anyway, I appreciate y'all. Happy New Year, and God bless y'all.